Hello, this is the story of the Roswell Incident from 1947 from Roswell, New Mexico. In 1947, it was a very different time frame. Historically, if you're looking at it, we were just ending World War II, and still in the midst of trying to figure out what had happened during the war. The country was a lot different. Computers were the size of classrooms. There were no cell phones. There were no televisions in every home. The idea of a TV was just beginning to start to take hold. And the idea that we all had a cell phone to walk around with was unheard of. There were phones in homes, but those phones were attached to walls. Everyone really kind of huddled around a radio to get their stories and their information from and their news. So I wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to hear the story of Roswell. I will tell bits and pieces in a storyteller fashion so that you can make your own decision on the mystery of Roswell, New Mexico, and the Roswell Incident of 1947. There are several characters and people that I will speak about, and these are real characters, real people. This story can be decided whether you believe that it is a true story on the side of the eyewitness accounts or the true story on the side of the government officials who explained what had happened, what they say had happened in Roswell. So when you look at the people who are involved, I will begin the story with a discussion of Brazel. Brazel was a rancher that was living in Roswell, and he called Sheriff Wilcox, who was the local sheriff at the time, and mentioned that on his property he had a large area of a debris field, pieces of unknown objects that his animals would not go near, and nor his horses. And he asked for some help because he didn't recognize the items. So he asked Sheriff Wilcox if he would come in and take a look because he believed on his ranch that he had pieces of a UFO. Well, knowing that, Wilcox made a phone call to the local army base. He called because he figured if this was something from the base that they would be better equipped to deal with it if it was an unknown object. He got a hold of Major Jesse Marcel, who was Army intelligence. The sheriff then asked him to go out to Brazel's ranch to take a look at what was there. Major Jesse Marcel said, "Fine, I'm going to go out. We'll take a look. I'll be right out." On his way, he asked a friend of his, Sheridan Cavett, if he would go with him. He was an intelligence officer and he worked at the Pentagon. If he would accompany him to the ranch. When they got to the ranch, they saw a large debris field and they found items that they did not know what they were. Several pieces looked almost like wood pieces that were lightweight. Those lightweight pieces had writing on them. They looked somewhat like hieroglyphics. Those hieroglyphics were not recognized by either gentleman. They asked if there were codes that maybe were being used in the Army and intelligence, and neither one of them recognized the codes. Now, the piece of wood-like material that they found the writing on, neither one of them could identify. They also found a piece of metal, pieces of large metal that reminded them somewhat of lightweight tinfoil. But they noticed when they crushed any of the smaller pieces that the pieces flattened back out to their original shape. When they flattened back out, Jesse and Sheridan were now confused as to whether or not those materials were actually made by the Army or anything in top secret kind of classified work. Neither one of them knew. They said that this is an unknown material. Well, now both of them were very excited, feeling like that they did find pieces of a UFO. From there, Jesse put the items that he found in the back of his truck. On the way back, before he dropped it off at the base, he stopped at his home and woke his son to share the items that they found. He said, "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. This may be pieces of a UFO." And he wanted to share them with his son, showing him the wooden-like pieces with writing and the metal pieces that flattened back out. He took it back to the base. Now, from there, Colonel Blanchard, who was the media specialist, put an announcement in a press release that said, "We have in our possession a flying saucer. This thing crashed north of Roswell, and we'll have it shipped all to General Ramey at the 8th Air Force at Fort Worth." That was listed in the local newspapers. It got picked up by the media with claims that now we had found a UFO in Roswell. Well, when the materials made their way to General Ramey, he took a look at them. He's an Army specialist, and he was very angry because he said that the materials were pieces of a weather balloon and that the two should have recognized those pieces. So from there, he sent those items back and said to Major Jesse Marcel, "We're going to do a press release. You need to go back on. We're going to take pictures of the items that we found with you in the picture, and we're going to retract the statement that we found a UFO." When Jesse showed up at the press release, this is a picture of Major Jesse Marcel and the items that he was told to pose with. He realized that the items in the picture, or that he was being asked to pose with, were not the items that he pulled from Brazel's ranch. He talked to Sheridan Cavett after the fact and said, these were not the items we found. And Sheridan said, "This is beyond our control now. We need to let it go." And Major Jesse Marcel, being a good soldier, followed orders and let that go. Now, Brazel, the original rancher, was spotted around town with Army officials and later retracted his statement that he had found a UFO, claiming that it was a weather balloon and he had made up the story to get publicity. It looked as though he may have been threatened. Now, there were many other sites in Roswell at the time that were sightings, various sightings from Air Force intelligence and from individual witnesses in the area. Anywhere on this map were additional sightings, whether they be flybys of specific items, of unidentified flying objects, or sightings from the locals. Jim Ragsdale and his girlfriend were out at camping one night, and they heard a loud crash and saw a bright light and went to investigate. They took their flashlights and went for a better look. When they got to the clearing, they realized that what they thought may have been a plane crash was a UFO crashed with alien bodies scattered. They noticed small bodies, and they were very frightened now because of this. So they took off, and they said they would come back in the morning with daylight. When they attempted to re-enter the area where this sighting was initially, they were stopped by Army specialists and security and told that there was nothing there to see and forget what they had seen. Glenn Dennis, that same night, who was a local mortician, which is a person who deals with the dead and funeral parlors, was called. He was called by the Army base and asked for hermetically sealed coffins. Hermetically sealed means no air can go in or out of that coffin. He was asked for them to be child size. He thought perhaps that there was a school bus accident or some other accident with small children. He said, "I'll help, I'll come, I'll bring. This is the field that I specialize in." And he was told quite abruptly, please to just bring the coffins, and they did not need any help. He was stopped before he could get anywhere on the base besides the security entrance with the coffins. Later that night, he saw a friend of his who is an Army nurse who works on the base. She was beside herself and very upset about the situation, and he could not understand what the problem was because she would not tell him anything. She told him that she could not tell him any details, that she was threatened to keep her mouth shut. After much time had passed, Glenn managed to get her to tell the story, and she told a story of helping to do autopsies on aliens. They were small, child size, had no hair on their bodies. They had 3 fingers on each hand, and she was very upset. They had large eyes. She was beside herself because this was an alien and she did not know and understand why she had to help. She was also threatened to keep her mouth shut and not talk about the events or something may happen to her. If you fast forward through time, there was a time where it is believed that she was transferred from the base and had died en route. If you fast forward to 1994, Roswell was the study and under speculation as to what actually happened in New Mexico in 1947. And General Ramey was still around at the time, and he had said it was top secret, the work that we were doing. We couldn't discuss it. We were in the middle of a project called Project Mogul. And Project Mogul, we looked at items, we sent them up into outer space or up into the sky, and they came back down. And then we had to go out and find these items. And so people were seeing things from our experiments and tests. We couldn't discuss them because it was top secret. He said also the bodies that were supposedly found, that were alien bodies, were actually crash test dummies. These crash test dummies were used, and when they were put into outer space or brought back down or into the atmosphere, we had to go find them. So people who may have spotted these crash test dummies may have assumed or thought that they were aliens, which they were not. Glenn Dennis still had something to say, and he was the local mortician. He said to this day he didn't understand why a nurse friend of his would lie about the autopsy and feel threatened at the outcome. Also, he said to his dying day, Major Jesse Marcel, claimed that the items that he posed with in the picture for the press release were not the items that were found on Brazel's ranch. His son has also come forward and said that that is also true, that those items were not the same. So what really happened in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947? It is truly a mystery. And now it's up to you to decide what you think happened.